In the year 19 AD, the most loved man in the world was dying. He wasn't on a battlefield. He wasn't surrounded by enemies. He was in a palace, in the heart of the civilized East. His name was Germanicus. To the people of Rome, he was more than a general. He was a god in human form. He was handsome, he was brilliant, and he was the rightful heir to the greatest empire on earth. He was the man who was supposed to save Rome from its own darkness. But as he lay in his bed, his body was withering. His skin was turning a sickly gray. His breath was shallow. He told his wife he could feel the life being drained out of him, not by a sickness he understood, but by something far more sinister. When his servants finally tore up the floorboards of his bedroom and searched behind the walls, they didn't just find evidence of a crime. They found the unthinkable. Charred human remains. Lead tablets engraved with his name and terrifying curses, and objects of dark magic that had been hidden there while he slept. Germanicus wasn't just being murdered, he was being cursed. This is the story of the Golden General, the mystery that broke Rome's heart. Welcome to Unheard History. If you want to understand why Germanicus had to die, you have to understand the terror he inspired in those who held power. At this moment in history, Rome was ruled by Tiberius. Tiberius was the opposite of Germanicus. Where Germanicus was warm, Tiberius was cold. Where Germanicus was loved, Tiberius was feared. Where Germanicus walked among the people, Tiberius hid in the shadows of his palace. Tiberius knew that as long as Germanicus lived, his own position was never safe. The legions didn't want a shadow, they wanted the sun. They wanted Germanicus. But killing the most popular man in the empire wasn't something you could do with a sword. A public execution would start a civil war. An accident on the battlefield would be too suspicious. To kill a god, you needed something invisible. You needed a conspiracy that reached from the highest offices in Rome to the darkest corners of the occult world. And you needed a man who was willing to lose his soul to get the job done. That man was Gnaeus Piso, a man who hated Germanicus as much as the emperor did. But even Piso couldn't do it alone. He needed a weapon that Roman law didn't know how to fight. He needed magic. To the Romans, magic wasn't a fairy tale. It was a terrifying reality. They lived in a world where the boundary between the living and the dead was thin. They believed in defictiones, curse tablets. These were small sheets of lead inscribed with the name of a victim and a plea to the gods of the underworld to seize them, to twist their limbs, to stop their heart, and to drag them into the earth. These tablets were often buried in graves, thrown into sacred springs, or, most terrifyingly, hidden inside the house of the victim. The Romans believed that if a curse was placed correctly, no medicine could stop it. Germanicus was sent to the east, to Syria, to settle a diplomatic crisis. It was a position of high honor, but it was also a trap. Tiberius had appointed Piso as the governor of Syria specifically to watch Germanicus, to block him, to humiliate him. But as Germanicus traveled through the east, his popularity only grew. In Egypt, he was treated like a pharaoh. In Syria, the people flocked to him. He was the emperor in everything but name. And then, suddenly, he fell ill. It started with a fever. Then came the hallucinations. He claimed he saw shadows in his room. He claimed he could hear whispers in the walls. His doctors were baffled. His pulse was strong, but his spirit was breaking. That's when the search began. The account of what they found in Germanicus's house comes from the historian Tacitus, and it reads like a horror movie. As Germanicus grew weaker, his friends began to suspect foul play. They tore through the palace in Antioch. Behind the walls and under the floorboards, they discovered the remains of human bodies, spells, and curses. They found lead tablets with the name of Germanicus scratched into them. They found half-burnt ashes smeared with human blood. These were not the tools of a poisoner. They were the tools of a venefica, a sorceress. Suspicions immediately turned to Piso's wife, Plancina. She was known to associate with a woman named Martina, a notorious dealer in poisons and occult charms. The mystery deepened. Was Germanicus being poisoned slowly, or was the psychological terror of finding these objects killing him? In the ancient world, the two were often the same. Poisons like belladonna and aconite didn't just kill. They caused madness. They made you see things. They made the victim believe they were being hunted by demons. Germanicus sat up in his bed and looked at his friends. He told them, "If my death had been natural, I might have had a grievance against the gods. But as it is, I am being cut down by the crimes of Piso and Plancina." He made them swear an oath of vengeance. Then, the Golden General, the man who had survived a dozen battles in the frozen forests of Germany, took his last breath. He was only 33 years old. The news of his death hit Rome like an earthquake. The city went into spontaneous mourning. Shops closed. The Senate fell silent. The people wept in the streets. But amidst the grief, a question began to grow. Where was the body? And what would it reveal? Stop. I want you to think about what happened next. Because what usually happens after a high-profile death in Rome is a funeral, a cremation, a public display of grief. But Germanicus's body was treated differently. Before he was cremated in Antioch, his body was stripped and placed in the forum for everyone to see. Now, why would they do that? According to the witnesses, they were looking for a sign that the physical body could no longer hide the truth of how he died. Some said his heart would not burn in the funeral pyre, an ancient Roman belief that a heart saturated with poison becomes fireproof. Others said his skin showed dark blotches that only appeared on those killed by secret toxins. But while the people stared at his cold, gray skin, the real conspirators were already moving. Piso didn't run. He didn't hide. He acted like a man who had the full protection of the emperor. He returned to Rome, not as a mourner, but as a conqueror. He believed he was untouchable. He was wrong, because he had underestimated one thing: the rage of a woman who had lost everything. Agrippina the Elder, the wife of Germanicus, was not a woman who stayed in the shadows. She carried her husband's ashes across the sea in a golden urn. When she landed in Italy, thousands of people were waiting for her. She didn't say a word. She simply held the urn high and walked through the crowd. She was forcing Rome to look at its own crime. The pressure became so great that Tiberius could no longer protect Piso. A trial was ordered. It was the trial of the century. Piso stood before the Senate. The evidence of the poison was weak. Poisoners are good at their jobs, after all. But the evidence of the magic? The lead tablets? The human remains? That they couldn't explain away. Piso looked to the emperor for help. He looked for a sign of support from the man he had served so faithfully in the shadows. Tiberius looked away. In that moment, Piso realized the truth. He was a loose end, and loose ends in the Roman Empire are always cut. That night, Piso went home. He began writing a letter to the emperor pleading for his children's lives. The next morning, his servants found him. His throat had been cut. His sword was lying beside him. Was it suicide? Or was it the emperor's final fix to keep Piso from talking? History calls it suicide, but the shadows of the palace know better. With Piso dead, the trial collapsed. His wife Plancina was acquitted, some say because she held her own secrets over the emperor's head. The case was closed, but the mystery of Germanicus was never solved. Rome had lost its hero, Tiberius had lost his rival, and Agrippina had lost her heart. The golden age of Rome had ended before it ever began.
But the most disturbing part of this story isn't the murder. It's what was found under the floorboards. Because it reminds us that even in a world of legions and laws, there is another world. A world of lead and blood and whispers. And that world always wins. Germanicus' story is a reminder that history is not just made of big battles and famous speeches. It is made of the things we find in the dark. The lead tablets, the charred remains, the things hidden behind the walls. For 2,000 years, scholars have tried to prove exactly how Germanicus died. Was it arsenic? Was it a virus? Was it simply the stress of a man who knew he was being hunted? We will never know for sure. But perhaps the method doesn't matter as much as the intent. The intent to erase a man so completely that even his death became a riddle. Tiberius got what he wanted. He ruled for another 18 years, but he spent those years in a state of growing madness and isolation on the island of Capri, haunted by the ghosts of those he had destroyed. The Golden General was gone, but the curse stayed with Rome until the very end. This is Unheard history. If this story sent a chill down your spine, subscribe, because the next secret we uncover is much closer than you think. Good night.